Sphira period, the counting of the Omer. And I believe it has a unique relationship to the Bnei Noach. And that is because, as we know, that the 7 laws were re-given at Sinai. So since the counting of the Omer relates to preparation for the receiving of the Torah at Sinai, it seems to be logical to say that the preparation also bears a relationship to the Bnei Noach, to the Noahide community. Primarily, as you all I'm sure know already, the idea of the 7 weeks is to rectify as much as possible and to improve character before we get to actually receiving the Torah. Hasidic literature speaks about it in terms of rectifying the physicality and materialistic part of the person. So let's see if so there's this booklet. I don't know if it's available online. It's called The Counting of the Omer. I don't know if you could see that. Maybe aware of it. It's from Rabbi Simon Jacobson from the Meaningful Life Center. And it's really practical. Some of you have this?
There's an app online that also does it.
Oh, amazing. So this week is a week of Netzach, endurance, fortitude, and ambition. It says here, endurance and ambition is a combination of determination and tenacity. It is a balance of patience, persistence, and guts. Endurance is also being reliable and accountable to establish a security and commitment. Without endurance, any good endeavor or intention has no chance of success. In other words, that the better the idea we have for change, the harder it's going to be. And therefore, the more endurance we need to stick it out and be able to see it to the finish line. So, next paragraph here. Endurance means to be alive, to be driven by healthy and productive goals. It is a readiness to fight for what you believe, to go all the way. Without such commitment, any undertaking remains flat and empty. It is an energy that comes from within and stops at nothing to achieve its goals. This, of course, requires that endurance be closely examined to ensure that it is used in a healthy and productive manner. So it's also dangerous because if a person's determination is for something wrong, the chances are because of his determination and endurance that he may accomplish it. So we better make sure that we're trying our goals are the right goals. That's the other side of the coin here. But obviously this is extremely, extremely important because so often we have so many good ideas and we never follow through. I mean, or we follow through on some, but not on all, and the hardest ones fall through. But yeah, I remember in school, I mean, I guess this happens to so many people, but as you get older, things you were hoping to accomplish when you're younger, you never end up doing. I remember I wanted to finish the whole Talmud. I was always buying another book, another Sefer, another Torah book, but most of them I never finished. But anyhow, so the idea is not to be like that. The idea is to endure and to finish things up. So, but obviously, I guess a person has to have to some extent a realistic goal, but follow up, to finish, to stick with something till the end. I think when you're young, this is harder because first of all, there's an idea of not realizing how long things can take. What we're saying here is despite obstacles, despite how long it may take to stick with it until the end, But this also calls for a lot of sacrifice. And often I tell my children this as well, and I share with you now that I think it's important to have an awareness to walk towards the gates of righteousness, and to accomplish great things in our moral and spiritual life do take sacrifice. Giving up other things. I think there's also another thing is that people want to accomplish in spiritual things, but they think of it as the icing on the cake. And they have all their physical ambitions, material ambitions, and then they're also going to have some spiritual ones. And, chances are something has got to give. You're not going to be able to do them all. And we have to make a choice. And I think the thing is, being aware of that is important. Not thinking that, I'm going to have it all. Because what ends up happening is you don't have it all, and maybe you don't even have either one because you're trying to accomplish them both. But usually it's more the spiritual that takes the beating. It's the moral and spiritual things that, take or put to the side. Because to sacrifice, whether it's, extra time making a living or things like that, that's a felt physical sacrifices are the ones we really feel. So definitely takes a lot of endurance, fortitude, and ambition. So that's this. We're just an example, and it's a good idea to examine it because this is really good for the Ben Noach. Because again, this touches on character, it touches on the rational and moral advances of man, and very extremely practical. Talking about interaction with other people. I think yesterday was 23rd day, and that's Gvura Netzach, discipline and endurance, he calls it, Rabbi Jacobson. Says, examine the discipline of your endurance. Endurance must be directed towards productive goals and express them in a construction manner. In other words, it needs to be controlled, disciplined, organized, focused towards the proper goals, not to spread beyond those goals to other things. Okay. Okay, so let's go on now to, we started chapter 2 in the world of the Ger. And it's going to go through the prayer of Adam. Let's see this. Let's see what this is all about here. A prayer of Adam on page 42. The prayer of Adam. Lord God of the world, you created the whole world for glory, splendor, and power. Meaning, I think he means to reveal your glory, splendor, and power. You made it according to your will and your kingship forever and ever, and for your glory for generation after generation. There's nothing concealed from you and nothing is hidden from your eyes. You formed me by the work of your hands, and you gave me dominion over all your creations, that I should be master over what you made. So again, this is Adam speaking and first praising God before getting into his supplications, right? Which is the way prayers are supposed to be. First, the praise, you begin with praise, and then you actually ask what you want, and then you say thank you for Hashem's listening, considering, and responding to the prayer. But the crafty serpent aroused and seduced me with the tree of lust and desire, and also the wife of my bosom enticed me. And now I do not know what will be, what will happen to my children, and what will happen to me and to the generations that will come after me. So this is introducing, I guess, what the prayer is going to be about, that he's being honest with God about his anxieties about what's the future going to bring now that there's been this sin. But it's interesting that in this prayer, he's still kind of pointing a finger towards the serpent and the wife, which I find interesting. You should, instead of saying, "I sinned before you with the tree," he's still the serpent and my wife. Interesting. Okay, next paragraph. But one thing is, before actually, just something came to my mind, and that, look at Adam's concern. He's thinking, what's going to be with the next generations? He's concerned with the future generations, and it's important to think about future generations. We don't always have the time to do that, but it really makes a huge difference. When we think in our lives about how our actions may affect the future. And that's one thing, when you have children, it really does help us to be better people, because we think, if your children are around, you don't act the same way if they're not around. And you think, if they find out about this, in other words, if a person has a desire, a person has a hope that their children should follow on a good path, they know that they have to act accordingly. If they're not a good example, that could really push things off track. If they're a healthy, sensible, emotionally healthy person, they know their actions are going to have an effect, whether that means being abusive to the kids, whether that means being a bad example in other ways. So it's an extra encouragement. It knocks us into shape to make sure that we don't veer off. So thinking about our children and the future is really a very great aid in kind of keeping us serious about life and realizing that our actions really affect, our actions have an effect. Okay, next paragraph. I know and understand that no living being can be considered righteous before you. So what strength have I to face you? I have no mouth to answer for what I did, and no eye to raise, for I sinned and was evil. And for my iniquity I was driven out till this day. Okay, so now he's fessing up to it. So that's good. He's admitting, okay. And now I have plowed and cultivated the earth to work for what I can take out of it. And now I am not as fearful or terrified about living on the earth as I was at first. But from the moment I ate from the tree of knowledge and transgressed your word, my wisdom was taken from me, and I am now ignorant, without knowledge and a fool. I do not understand what will be. Please now, merciful and gracious God, return your great mercy to the crown of your creation, upon the soul that you blew into me, and the life that you graciously gave me at first, for you are kind and patient. May you in your kindness cause my prayer to rise before your throne of glory. May my salvation reach your throne of mercy, and may my supplication and words of my mouth find favor before you. And please do not hide from my request, for you are and will ever be forever. Please, Hashem, command and have compassion on the work of your hands, and let me understand what will happen to my descendants and future generations, and what will become of me day by day and month by month. Do not conceal the wisdom of your ministering angels from me. Quite an interesting prayer. He wants to have the knowledge. It seems like he's more concerned with what's going to be in the future. He's praying for knowledge and in general, and praying for knowledge in particular about what's going to be with his future generations. Let's see. It says right here on page 43, Adam's prayer was a request for prophecy. He wanted to know the future, and God answered him. Adam became a prophet. His desire for prophecy was a desire for the revelation of God. God had spoken directly to Adam in the Garden of Eden, but now he spoke to him only through an angel. Sefer Raziel was intended to put Adam on the path that leads back to God and to true prophecy. So it's really so, I think, apropos that this is the case, because it focuses us back on the objective. Talking about big ambitions, talking about endurance, it's incredibly appropriate, because basically it kind of leads us back to the idea that In a certain way, the objective is to get to the level of prophecy. That's one of those sealing. Adam was seeking that, and it's inherently in the human, soul, in his deep desire to have prophecy. I mean, how many times have you asked yourself on a daily basis, if only I knew what God wanted from me, if only I knew what to do, only God would tell me what was the right thing to do. I don't see the future. I don't know how this act is going to play out. If only I knew. Or sometimes we have two good options, or two things that we're judging and we just weighing and we just don't know. And we say, if we only knew. And again, you see it in the Torah, in the Tanakh, in the book of Judges, and in the first temple period, but particularly in the book of Judges, I think through maybe the story of King David, you see about the Urim V'Tumim, about the high priest's breastplate, and how they received messages from God of what to do. And when they had a real question, they would go and ask. I think in modern times, people have a difficulty with this, and then, we'll go to science, and, it's kind of primitive to go. But in reality, this is so wrong, because we really just don't know. And we see it again and again in the news and in history. All the best pundits come along and they have ideas, and they're just wrong. Every time they're wrong again and again. Every time they predict something, they're wrong. The computer's predictions are wrong. Everything, constantly. So you see that, despite all the advances, we still don't know what's going to be. We still can't, accurately project or accurately assess what the future holds. So I think it's something that human beings really want to know. That's for one thing. The other aspect of prophecy is that level of intimacy with God, and knowing what it is that has to be fixed, knowing what it is that's God's specific will in this specific situation. Okay. After the conclusion of Adam's prayer, Sefer Raziel continues with a narrative. After 3 days of prayer, the angel Raziel came to him and sat by the side of the river that comes out of the Garden of Eden. He prepared to him toward the end of the day as the sun was setting. In his hand was a scroll, and he said to him, Adam, why do you despair? Why are you so sad and worried? From the day that you stood up in prayer and supplication, your words were heard. Now I have come with pure understanding and great wisdom to make you wise with the words of this holy scroll. In them you will learn what will befall you until the day of your death. And every child of yours who fills your place and all later generations that conduct themselves according to this holy scroll with purity and upright heart and humble spirit will know what will happen to them in every month, day and night. And all things will be revealed to them. Now, Adam, draw close and turn your heart to the path of this scroll and its holiness. Let's see footnote 8, famous story. The Midrash teaches that God showed Adam the future until the end of days. Adam saw a beautiful soul named David that was destined to be stillborn. Adam sacrificed 70 years of his own life so that David could live. But not only Adam was a prophet. The sages teach that all names are given by prophecy. Everyone who has a child and has given it a name has experienced prophecy, for all names are given by prophecy. Okay, so that's an interesting comment. I mean, let's not pat ourselves on the back too much, and say that because we named our kids, we were all prophets. I mean, it's not a state of being, giving a name. It's maybe a divine inspiration, person, thinking of the name for their child, but that's not the state of being a prophet, as Maimonides explains, and the way a person divests himself of this world and every evil character trait, and meditates on all the highest concepts of godliness and God's existence in the spheres, as the Maimonides explains. So, I mean, it's also this midrash saying that Adam saw King David is fascinating, because if it was destined from the beginning that the Messiah should come from David's seed, how could it have been that originally fate had it that David was a stillborn? So that means that with Adam's decision, the whole history was all of the future of the messianic history was propelled forward. What was the story before? If there was no King David's, then who was going to be the Messiah, and who was going to be the Jewish king? Who was it? So, it's funny because I heard this story when I was a child and I never really thought about it, but it's kind of leaves a lot of questions about, what could have been, or what would have been, Okay.
Rabbi, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Is this holy scroll, is that a Torah scroll?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's the writing, it's Kabbalistic wisdom of, from this angel. I don't know. I believe so. Let's look at the next paragraph on page 44 if you have the book. It says, and the angel Raziel opened the scroll and read it into the ears of Adam. When Adam heard the words of this holy scroll from the mouth of the angel Raziel, he fell on his face in fear. The angel said to him, Adam, arise and be strong and do not be afraid. Take this scroll from my hand and guard it, and from it you will know and comprehend wisdom. Make it known to all who are worthy, and it will be their portion. As Adam took the scroll, a flame shot up from the riverbank, and the angel ascended in a fire to heaven. Adam knew that he was an angel of God, and that the king had sent this book to strengthen him in purity and holiness. So, well, for one thing, we see that, God didn't abandon Adam even after he left the Garden of Eden. God still was directing him and teaching him, and sent a messenger, an angel, to teach him the highest secrets. I mean, it's quite interesting that Adam was banished, and he violated, committed the sin, and yet he's still on a level where God is willing to reveal to him these type of secrets. It's quite fascinating. I would say that, why doesn't God give him the Talmud first or something? Why don't let's start from the beginning again? Again, evidently, first of all, we know that the sin wasn't just a low core sin to begin with. But evidently, Adam retained quite a high level despite the sin. Okay, next paragraph. 4 generations later, the book was given to Enoch, who used its wisdom to purify himself until he was like an angel. He immersed himself in a wellspring and concealed himself in a cave, meditating on the wisdom of the Sefer Raziel until he understood his mission on earth. Look at footnote 9. I don't know if you have that. It says, this shows that for one who follows the Torah, there's no such thing as fixed karma, meaning destiny. For in his great mercy, God elevated Enoch above his natural destiny, and he then took up a much higher calling. Okay. Enoch separated himself from all earthly beings and continued purifying himself until he was, quote, no more. For God had taken him into heaven and transformed him into the angel Metatron, the heavenly prince who supervises the angelic overseers. That's unbelievable. From here we learn that in the presence of Hashem, the God of Israel, there is no fixed destiny. There is no limit to what people can attain. They can even become angels. Wow, it's really unbelievable statement. But obviously we understand the sacrifice. He separated himself from all earthly things. He concealed himself in a cave. So he cut himself off from all worldly matters. So he put all his efforts into the highest level of spiritual matters, into purification and godliness, and he left everything else behind. His wife, children, if he had any of those things. It's kind of similar to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He was in a cave, immersed himself there, and he remained there. Of course, it seems like Enoch remained in this cave for a much longer time than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did. So, incredible, but it came with so much sacrifice. So this really brings up our point from before. At the same time, it doesn't seem like the Torah is really asking us to do this. Certainly we see from the laws given to Israel and to all mankind as well. I mean, a person's supposed to get married, have children, not live in a cave by themselves. So, but nevertheless, there's so much still to learn from this story. Yes, questions? No? Okay. All right. So we're going to stop.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I'm so sorry. There was something that you said in the prayer, or while you were reading the prayer, that really struck me. And it kind of made me feel sad, in the sense that he had all the wisdom of the world before he sinned, and he kind of bemoans his state now to Hashem. He's kind of saying, I lack wisdom now. It was just this struck me kind of very sad.
Yeah, it is quite sad, isn't it? But in a certain sense, we've all been in situations like that, but we're just unaware. Maybe I more than many of you. Meaning to say, we've had opportunities that we've lost, and maybe things that we can't get back, can never be in that spot. And he really was in that situation. And they say that in the world of truth, after a person leaves this world after 120 years, that part of the purification process and part of the suffering of the soul is to see all those things, lost opportunities, where they made a wrong decision, and they see what would have occurred if they wouldn't have done that, if they would have made the other decision, and how that ripple effect, and they would have been on a much different level if they would have made the other choice. And that's really difficult to face, really difficult. It seems like Adam he remained with enough wisdom to be aware of what he had done and what he had lost. And that's a very painful thing.
Yeah.
Okay, see where we're up to in the path of the righteous Gentile. We're in courts of law. I think we're up to about paragraph 36, but maybe I'm wrong. I think so. I think on I have it in the older version, page 107. I think we're up to about 35. Paragraph 35 in courts of law. A judge should imagine himself with a sword resting on his neck and the pit of hell open below him. And he should know who is a judge and in front of whom he judges, and who will seek retribution from him if he strays from the truth. Really powerful stuff, but really important for the judge to realize how serious his decisions are and what the repercussions are, how important it is what he's doing. In other words, basically, that if he renders a wrong decision, his punishment, meaning to say, if it's negligence, I mean, if he does everything he can, but he's limited as a human being, that's one thing. But if he's negligent, I mean, the punishment basically is, waiting for him. Okay. So there's, this level of real seriousness of the judge and awe and fear of God that a judge should have. Okay, 36. If a judge feels deeply in his heart that one of the litigants is in the right, and there's no proof for it, or if the judge feels that there is deception and trickery afoot by one of the litigants or with one of the witnesses, and there's no proof for it, or if he feels he cannot rely on the words of the witnesses even if he is not able to disqualify them, or if another similar situation arises, then this judge must disqualify himself from the case and be replaced by one who can judge with a whole heart in the matter. Fascinating. So even though he has a feeling that there's something wrong, but since there's no proof of it, it creates a problem, and he should get a different judge. But if the judge knows for sure that one of the witnesses is lying, he should not remove himself from the case, but judge it according to his understanding of the truth. And all these things are matters of the heart. So I guess in other words, what does he mean knowing for sure? And the first one is he feels it. The first one is a speculation. He has a feeling. The way he feels about it is this one is telling the truth, the other one isn't. But he doesn't have any evidence for it. In the second case, he knows definitely because there definitely is, because there's some proof. There's some proof of it. That could be based on, even if it's based on I don't know, some type of contradiction or some other point in which he knows for sure. I don't know if it can be based on, psychology, meaning to say the way, could it be based on the fact that, the witness can't look him straight in the face? Is that enough proof that someone's lying? I mean, what does it mean he knows for sure? It's a tough one. It's not explained here. Okay. But the point is, it's a matter of the heart, which means good judgment. So if, in other words, if he's for some reason just doesn't trust someone, has a negative feeling, that's problematic. He has a prejudice, he has a bias, and he should disqualify himself from the case. However, if he's listening to the witnesses and the litigants, and he picks up on contradictions and he picks up on, other suspicious conduct, which makes him believe that these people are not credible, to the extent that there's so much of that evidence that he knows definitely that that's the case, he should still stay on the case. Okay, 37. If a judge errs in his decision in a financial matter, he should retract his decision, restore everything. He should restore everything to its original status and retry the case. So if he distributed income, distributed property from one to another, and then he realized he made a mistake, he should return the property to the original owner and do it over again. If it is not possible to retract and restore, for instance, one of the litigants went to a foreign land and took the money awarded him, or the like, then the judge is held harmless for making restitution of the money. It's clear that he had no intention of causing damage. So in other words, if he did his best, but he made a mistake, and he found that later from a wiser or more knowledgeable judge, he made a mistake, then he doesn't have to repay the money. Okay, paragraph 38. Every judge should possess the following 7 attributes: wisdom, humility, fear of heaven, fear of sin, contempt for money, love of truth, beloved by his fellow man, and have a good reputation. 39. When is one beloved by his fellow man? When he views things in a favorable light and is humble, and he speaks and conducts business in a pleasant manner. He should be meticulous in fulfilling the commandments of God, and he should have conquered his evil inclination to the point that he is without blemish. His name should serve as an outstanding model for the generation. He should, how many judges like this can we have, though? That doesn't leave room for a lot of judges. He should be courageous in order to exact a righteous judgment against strong-willed wrongdoers. Money should not be precious to him so that he will not chase after it, for it is taught that if one desires to be rich, poverty will come upon him. He should not need to be exhorted to strive after truth, but should pursue truth from his own desire for it. He must love truth and despise whatever opposes truth, and he must flee from all forms of transgression. So, he keeps saying should. The judge, if you look at paragraphs 38 and 39, he says the judge should possess. But are they a minimum requirement? In other words, he doesn't say they have to possess. He says they should. So that leaves the question, what is the minimum criteria for a judge? Doesn't seem to be addressing that point. We know what is the optimum, but as I've just said, and as you can see, that's a tough, that's not easy to find a judge like that. I mean, you can find maybe a few, but not many. So anyway, he doesn't say, but it seems that someone is not a transgressor and lives a normal life, meaning to say they're not a gambler, they're not, they're living a respectable lifestyle, and they're familiar with the law, they can be a judge, particularly in civil matters. You don't have to be a big expert. Okay, paragraph 40. If a judge who possesses all these noble attributes cannot be found, then one should strive to find one who meets as many of these requirements as possible. Again, so that's good for us to know, but still we need to know, what's the minimum, but I think you can follow along basically in what I said. Okay. Now, what's the difference in paragraph 36 between fear of heaven and fear of sin? I mean, fear of heaven is more about being in awe of God and having a relationship with God. So that causes a person to have a fear when a person feels they're in the presence. And fear of sin is the fear of, it's more practical, relating to being afraid of committing a transgression and being cut off from God and also being punished. I have a question from Lori, but I don't see the whole thing.
It really wasn't a question. I was agreeing with you because I was sitting here thinking, who in the world would ever volunteer to be a judge?
Right. Well, listen, it's still a very honorable position, and I think so. It's a mix there. Who would? And here, see, that's the actually thing, and we find the same problem today in our society, is that probably a lot of the best people who should be doing it don't want to do it. For example, people hear that politicians are not honest, and so a lot of honest people don't want to get involved in it. So then we have a situation in which, leadership or people who are, maybe not, again, I don't want to really get into politics, but just as an example, or certain type of a lawyer or something where people have a reputation of not being the best, but we need good people doing these things. So people shy away from it because of the kind of crowd that it has a reputation for. We can't get anybody good. But interestingly, also in the cycle in this is that we have to be very careful with judges because, like you said, what happens is those who are more meticulous and have a greater fear of God will maybe be afraid of doing it, and therefore we'll have more candidates who don't have the proper fear of God because they're like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So we have to be very, very careful, because the people who'll be vocal and be seeking the position will very often be people who really don't meet the proper criteria. And that's the complexity of it, And it's interesting that we see that from Tanakh again, that the leaders of Israel didn't seek to be leaders, the best ones. I mean, Saul certainly said he was hiding. He didn't seek to be the king. But we don't see that David sought to be a king either. He was anointed. He never sought to be the king. It's something that, just was done to him, really. So, and we see the opposite, that those who seized power, they didn't end up too well. In Tanakh, we look at people, even if the prophets told them, that they would be king, but they got involved in, what was it, Yehu, who executed the royal family and appointed himself king. That didn't work out too well. So it's a real problem. We have to be very careful. But that also reflects the point that the leaders of the generation are a reflection of the generation. You don't get to be a leader just usually by just seizing power without any help. You have to have a lot of support. And unfortunately, that's, so if people fall to respect people and admire people and give power to people who are undeserving or actually destructive, I guess the right word is woe to such a generation. So, okay. All right, we're up to part 2. I think we're finished the discussion about halachic discussion about judges, and we can go to witnesses. And we have a few more minutes, so let's get going. Part 2, paragraph 1. A person may be convicted in a Noahide court by the testimony of a single witness, but only if the witness is known to be righteous. If the character of the witness is not known, it takes 2 witnesses to be able to convict the accused. It's permissible for the witnesses as well as the judge to be relatives of the accused. So there's no disqualification because of relatives, but at the same time, if we don't know about the character of the witness, you need 2. Now, what's the idea of 2 witnesses? What's the advantage of having 2 witnesses as opposed to 1 witness? I mean, I believe the point is you have 2, you can pull them out each and isolate them and compare the testimony one to the other. And if they contradict each other, you have a problem. That's why there's a tremendous advantage of having 2 witnesses. The only problem with the 2 witnesses is that you can have one witness who's honest and the other witness who's lying. And how do you know which one is the one who's contradicting and that's the liar and which one is telling the truth? You don't know. But so the point is that, we're basically sacrificing the conviction possibly of somebody, or the adjudication of a case for the sake of truth. In other words, if we don't feel comfortable with the authenticity of the evidence, even though we may still have 1 witness, it's problematic. Unless we really can trust the witness. So how does the character of a witness become known? It also seems to imply character witness testimony. People come and say this person is reliable, unless it's just that they're well known in the place that they live as being reliable and God-fearing, etc. That could also be the meaning. Okay. Paragraph 2. Person may testify against himself in a court of law, but since he is the accused, his character is definitely in question, and a second witness is necessary to be able to convict him. So this is very interesting. This one rule is dependent on the rule above, because there's a distinction between Jewish law and it seems like Noahide law, because in Jewish law, if I'm not mistaken, relatives are not acceptable as to bear testimony, to give testimony on a relative. For the same reason, a person can't give testimony about themselves, because obviously a person is related to themselves. So it comes out an interesting thing here that at the end of the day, a relative can testify against or in favor of their relative. But again, it goes either way. The testimony could be pro or con. It doesn't matter. Either way, it's for a Jew, it's disqualified. But we're saying here in terms of a Noahide law that a relative is okay, but a person testifying about himself is not considered trustworthy since he's the accused, and you need another witness.
Rabbi, maybe I'm missing something here on number 2, but under what circumstance would somebody testify against himself?
It's called a confession. Have you ever heard of that?
Ah, okay.
Confessions. I mean, they're very common in secular court and here in the United States.
Okay.
It's also the same thing as an admission. Or person could be testifying on their own behalf also. This person can't testify at all without another witness. That's what we're saying. Now, that doesn't mean he can't make claims in court. There's a difference between witness testimony and making claims and arguments. Okay? It's just not the same level of evidence. In other words, according to Jewish law, in order to withdraw, a civil penalty from someone, you have to have a witness. In order to have a criminal penalty against someone, you have to have a witness as far as proof. Under Noahide law, you can have circumstantial evidence. So the question is, but that's separate from the idea of a claim. The accused can still make arguments. He can say, based on what the witness is saying, I should be excused. Or he could say, there isn't enough evidence. I mean, he can still argue on his own behalf, but whatever he says is not considered evidence in the case. You understand the distinction? Okay. Number 3. In other words, basically what I'm saying is that the person can act as a lawyer on their own behalf, but not as a witness on their own behalf. Okay, number 3. The witnesses must be subjected to a thorough and systematic scrutiny to reveal any inconsistencies or other flaws in their testimony. Now, but by the way, just to clarify something here, if there are 2 Noahides having a court conflict and one of them is claiming that someone else owes him money, the one making the claim seems like can testify because he's not being accused of doing anything wrong. It's the other guy who's being accused, and therefore his character is at issue. I mean, it creates an interesting question. Is that the intention here, or we're only talking about criminal type? But again, this is, in Noahide law, it's all criminal. In other words, is it considered theft or it isn't? We're talking about the 7 laws. They're all do nots. So if someone's accused of violating a thou shalt not, then they're under suspicion of bad behavior. Okay, paragraph 3. The witnesses must be subjected to a thorough and systematic scrutiny to reveal any inconsistencies or other flaws in their testimony. Something that doesn't happen in secular courts. It just doesn't happen. The only thing we have in our system is what's called cross-examination. But the judges don't scrutinize the witnesses. And you also, what you don't really do is I don't know, I've never really seen lawyers following up with a lot of details and, asking them, well, do you recall what color the person's eyes were or what this or that? I mean, I guess they could. It's more other questions. But in any event, the point is the job is left up to the other lawyer to ask to cross-examine. But, and it's also up to the judge to, sometimes the judges cut off cross-examination, don't let you continue. So But look, the Jewish standard, interestingly enough, despite the fact that it's being so old, is much higher as far as what a witness has to live up to than in the American and the Western system. So again, this is based on my own personal experience with witnesses. I haven't watched the recent big trials that are going on, but so I don't know what's went on there. I've witnessed local state Supreme Court criminal trials when I was interning for a criminal judge in Queens County, New York. And then I've also, conducted some trials, prosecuted some trials as an attorney and watched some. And you just don't get the same level of insistence on a tremendous amount of detail. But, there's also an issue is that, requiring a lot of detail makes it a lot harder to bring a claim too. In other words, if someone claims that something was stolen from them and you have to prove that, so you really have to remember a lot of details about the event. If you forget, it's going to get tough because you're going to be scrutinized. So again, this is basically a kind of, it's showing us the type of values that the Torah has and the halacha has, that it's more important that the witnesses should be truthful, and that we should make sure they're truthful, than we should prosecute a case. In other words, it should be better that someone who's forgetful and doesn't remember things shouldn't get their money back, and we shouldn't let witnesses pass through that don't really know enough of what they're talking about. That seems to be that seems to be the weights of values and interests that we're seeing here. It's going to be a lot harder to bring a case under Jewish law than under the current secular law. On the current secular law, all I have to do is testify, I did X, Y, and Z. Nobody asks me, detailed questions about the event. It's good enough. Okay. Paragraph 4, one is commanded to give truthful testimony in a court of law, even if he knows the testimony will damage a friend or exonerate an enemy. And this refers to civil litigation or criminal matters. In a criminal case, he is commanded to come forth and give testimony, even if the court does not request him to do so. This is also extremely important stuff, that a person is required to come forward, even in a criminal case, even if he hasn't been called to come forth. Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We could do one more. Maybe we'll begin it. We should probably continue it next time. It's a discussion. There's a lot to think about, but this is the halacha. Whether this has to apply to Noahide courts is an interesting question, which has to be examined, but he brings it so clearly. Rabbi Chlorfein's understanding is yes, this applies to non-Jewish courts. Though I would like to add that, again, prefacing before we read the disqualifications for witnesses in paragraph 5, that under Noahide law, circumstantial evidence is enough. So even if somebody isn't a witness, but his act could contribute to circumstantial evidence, probably not, but maybe. All right, let's see paragraph 5. There are 10 classifications that are disqualified as witnesses or as judges in a court of law: women, slaves, small children, fools and the insane, the deaf and the mute, the blind, even if they recognize voices, known transgressors, people who care not how they behave in public, husbands of women involved in the trial, and people who would benefit from a decision in the case. Now, obviously, the most glaring one that's difficult to deal with is number 1. Women. Why are we leaving women out of this? Slaves you can understand to a certain extent, because they're not full citizens and, they're someone's property, they're very dependent, or maybe you could say Small children we get. The rest of them we understand. Fools, the deaf and mute, okay, I get blind, I kind of understand maybe. Sure, they can't see what's going on in the courthouse, but the first one is quite difficult. Why are women can't be judges or witnesses? Why is that? I don't have a real, I don't have an absolute answer, but I have some ideas I can share with you about it. At least what it might tell us. I've thought about this question for many years of why this would be the case. It's a hard thing to, obviously in our society, but even not in our society, just in terms of logic. Why shouldn't a woman be able to, for example, testify? Why can't she testify? I want to also clarify something. We're not saying that a woman can't come to court and bring a claim. We're saying she can't testify on behalf of somebody else. We're also saying she shouldn't be a judge, kind of like a woman shouldn't be a rabbi, right? So why are we saying, what could, again, I'm going to give you a rationale, which I believe has validity to it. But, again, I don't think it's the end of the topic. I think it's something really that, I haven't dealt with sufficiently, but something that really needs to be examined. But here it is. I think fundamentally, philosophically, there's an idea that, women shouldn't have that level of responsibility in the public domain. Again, we're not looking at these things as rights. I think we're looking at them more in terms of their responsibility. And the idea is that, that, for example, as a witness, as we said before, a witness has to come forward, and this could take a long time. This takes away a person from their other responsibilities, their other, obligations, or from their life. Most people don't want to be part of a jury. Being a witness is kind of like being a part of a jury. You're being called, you're not getting paid. It's not a profession. It's a public responsibility to the society, but it's outside the home domain. So anyway, again, I think this is really similar to ideas that existed more in the 19th century and that people nowadays feel or not, or, modern thinking is incorrect. So, I'm admitting to that fact, but I'm saying, look, again, this is the Torah law. Whether it absolutely applies to Ben Noach, though, I wonder if that's the case. I wonder what his proof is that we know that this applies to Ben Noach. Because most of these things are learned from scriptural exegesis, it's called. We learn them from various words in scripture. So that would apply to Jewish law. I don't know how Rabbi Chlorfine knows that this applies to Noahide law. So I can look into that, because as we've learned from this book up until now, often he quotes from Maimonides, and it's not necessarily that it applies to Ben Noach. Again, we have to go back to the beginning of our GPS, so to speak, our original guidelines, and remember that there are different approaches to Noahide law. One is that it's very broad. There's 7 laws, and the rest of it is, basically, the Noahide have to figure it out how it should be kept. There's another approach that whatever laws exist, they have to follow the Jewish version of those laws, and whatever branches, and they extend to other branches. We talked about this many times. So if that's the case, the question is, how does he know this also? Do we know? And the same for many other things we've mentioned. This is all stuff that's discussed in relation to the Jewish courts of law for Jewish judges and witnesses. How do we know this applies to Noahide? What I'm saying is a lot of these things advice that Noahide should follow Jewish law, or is this absolute that the Talmud has actually said, yes, in a Ben Noach court should follow these things? I'd have to look into it more. I can't tell you on the drop of a hat at the moment.
Rabbi, what in this idea of a woman not being a judge, what do we do with Deborah?
Very, very good question. Yeah, good question. The answer is, of course, there's always exception to every rule. There's a lot of questions. I'll give you another one. It says that the judges are not supposed to come from converts, and we find that some of the, princes that were actually from the great grandchildren of Haman and so on and so forth. So there's an old saying, for every rule, there's an exception to the rule. So, so I think that there are exceptions made, evidently. If someone is exemplary, and clearly is chosen, that God, they have the talent, there may be exceptions. It's a very good question. Okay. But I think that's a general approach. I think the general approach, the idea is that the burden of being a judge is extremely serious. And I think, in general, like you said, there are exceptions, but I think what the law is telling us, in general, the law doesn't want, halacha doesn't want women to have their life to be so, tied up in public needs that are so demanding that they could neglect their children, and their family life. I think that's I believe that that's the main reason for it, in terms of how what's the logical, rational approach to it. Okay. We could discuss more. You can Google and see Rabbi Google says about it, I guess. But I'm going to stop over here. There's more. We can examine number 5 more next time.
Rabbi, you've got a couple of comments and questions in the chat box.
So question, do you think there may be fewer frivolous lawsuits in Jewish courts? Yeah, if the Jewish courts are running properly the way they're supposed to, yes, because the level of evidence and the witnesses have to be quite legit, as they say in the common. They have to really have a lot of knowledge of the facts. They can't just come in there and say anything. Also, as you may know, bearing false testimony is a serious transgression, and they could be liable for lashes for bringing false testimony. So, that's something else I've noticed, that often that in the court system as we have it, if witnesses contradict their testimony or claimants contradict their testimony, nothing really happens. I've never seen a case where anyone was really punished for perjury, unless there was some political, except on the news. I never heard of anyone who was actually, punished for perjury. And that's very serious, because I think witnesses need to realize that if they commit perjury, that we need a real deterrent to stop witnesses from lying. It's a very, very harmful thing. Basically what I'm saying is the Jewish court's approach seems to be, it's better that someone should fail to make a claim even though they're owed money. For example, what I do, negligence. It seems that according to Jewish law, the position of Jewish law seems to be that even if someone is hurt, but you need to have good witnesses. What if you don't have it? You're out of luck. So in other words, we'd rather make sure that we have something accurate and very reliable, even if that means certain people are not going to get their redress. While in secular law, we're much more liberal, and you can come and say whatever you want. It's up to the jury to decide if they believe you or not. You can do anything. Okay. Next question. Why is that converts cannot be judges? I don't know, except for, again, the first answer is that it's based on biblical exegesis. In other words, that the Talmudic scholars understood it from inferences in the words in the scripture. That's the first answer. The second answer is that I think it's, if you think about it, I think it could cause certain problems in terms of whether people would accept the judgment, and just accepting human weakness, that converts would be looked at differently, especially the first generation. and the feeling that they would be able to rule over those who are, who are native to the land, may be something that would come off as insulting, would come off as, and maybe illegitimate in the eyes of the common people, even though that's not right. But it may be, again, look, this is my idea. Don't take it as this is law. I'm just telling you what makes sense to me. Okay? Sometimes Rabbi Weissman tells you things just to give you a rationale that appears to me to be sensible. You can accept it, and it's not Torah from Sinai. It's, so I'll try to make that distinction. When I say I believe this is the rationale, that's me talking, and if it's something with a source, then, hopefully I'll recall to let you know. So that's as far as that goes. It's more, it needs more examination, but, and again, we see examples where converts were judges. So there are exceptions to this rule. I mean, that's what I was mentioning before, and we see some of the greatest rabbis were judges. So Rabbi Akiva was not a judge. It was commonplace that, his father was a convert, but maybe it means just the convert, not the children. Probably it may not mean the children can't be judges, maybe just the convert himself. I was under the impression that a convert is Jewish just as someone who is born Jewish. I guess that's a combination of the previous question. Yeah, I guess again, I think it's though a recognition that in certain ways, there are still distinctions and there's still differences. Which, by the way, answers a question that I'm often asked, is that the word ger in the Torah, why in the world would that ever refer to a convert, since a convert has the same halakhic status as a Jew? And I think what we're learning here is he doesn't always. There are times when a convert doesn't have the same status as a Jew, and therefore sometimes we have to say, yes, the ger, meaning a full-blown convert, is included in this law. Sometimes that's necessary. It's not always talking about the ger toshav, the Noahide living among the children of Israel. But again, so this is one of the exceptions in which a ger is not the same. Sorry, questions do not tie in with this one. No, that ties in fine. Maybe it would be unseemly for. That's very smart. Yeah, Lori, that's correct. That is actually one of the reasons given, for example, why a woman is not called up to the Torah. It says because it's disrespectful to the men. I may not be translating the Hebrew quite correctly. It's disrespectful to the congregation, but you're saying something different. It's unseemly, meaning from a modesty perspective, and that's also true. I'm going to say something that's true but provocative right now. So, and women are not going to like it. But it appears that many commentaries were of the opinion, it could be even, if I'm not mistaken, there are also Talmudic statements that seem to lead us to believe that as was common belief in the 19th century and earlier centuries, that women are more emotional, and that there's a fear that their emotions may play too much of a role in their decision making. And that might be part of this as well. There's a kind of there seems to be that approach as well. Again, you could argue, well, is this true today? Maybe because the women's identities have changed in the outside. Would that affect this at all? And I don't generally know, obviously, but
Rabbi, could it go back to the garden where Eve was told he shall rule over you? Maybe it goes back that far, that we're still dealing with that.
I think that men certainly have a tendency to have a greater concern with, more public issues, and I think women have a natural tendency to be more concerned with their family. And even when they're listening to the news and so on, again, this isn't everyone, but I think it's a feminine tendency, and you could disagree with me, that's fine. To think of, even in terms of news, well, how does it affect my family? What do I need to do? And I think men have more of a tendency just generally, on a more societal or maybe even hypothetical question as far as, the issues that are going on in the public domain. I think that's just the way women and men were made differently. I mean, women, in other words, the idea is that the instinct of motherhood and family is so strong that it affects, women's perspective on most things in life. And that might be part of it. Yeah. Isn't it true that the makeup of a woman is indeed different than that of a man? Not that there is anything wrong with that, but it has been said women are more emotional. Hashem made it that way. And I mean no offense to my sisters in here. My apologies. I want to say something else. And this is something that I've never seen anywhere, but I really believe there's a lot of truth to that. And is that men have to have something. I mean, the man's life, a Jewish man's life, and a Noahide's following the laws, the main life revolves around the family. Man gets married, the wife, the children. They're always worrying about the children, bringing up the children. So who's in charge? Women is in charge. The man is working. He often has a boss, so on and so forth. He's not in charge. So I think the idea is to create domains also. The man should have an area of province that's his province. Because if not, the man has no province. Otherwise we're mixing things up. So, well, if a man is appropriate, then the home should be his province. And everything gets confused. Although we all know that usually doesn't work. Very few men can really take care of the home or take care of children the same way that a man can. So it's extremely rare. So, I think that's part of it too. And we there's an issue of creating order in society, and that the different genders, again, it's completely opposite of what's going on today and the views in modern society today, completely the opposite. But the idea is there are roles, and that so when people are young, they should know, what they should expect and where their areas of their responsibility lie. And men they're in the army and in waging wars and things like that, and that relates very much to governance and the force that's needed to govern. And women naturally tend towards the home, and but that's naturally where the way things have been from the beginning. So I think all of those things play a role. You're talking about the most serious, the biggest career. I mean, being a judge is one of the most serious careers and responsibilities somebody can have. And so, I think that definitely, plays a role. So
Rabbi, in the Lori's comment about it might be unseemly for a female to rule over males,
right.
made me think in the IDF, I know women are required to serve in the IDF. Are they permitted to have officer positions and be an authority over men in the IDF?
Of course they are, because the Israeli government, the Israeli army was historically socialist and atheist. But the religious communities and political groups fought very hard for exemptions for religious women, not to have to go into the army. And the truth is that they were of the view that a woman going into the army is almost like prostitution, from the point of view of a woman is not allowed to be under the absolute control of a man. In other words, a woman is their sergeant or their officers are male. That's a huge problem. Not permitted. But it's also well known that there's the whole look, it's like college in America. At 18, they go to the army and they're young men, young women there, mixing it up. And then during the day, they're all stressed out. And at night, they're partying out. It's not a place for religious observance, generally speaking. Um, a person probably could find, the Hesder. There are groups of religious companies and units that stay separate, and they stay, male separate. There's a very big push now to do away with that. Again, based on modern views of gender neutral and all that other stuff, and giving, women more of that, to do away with the separation and to put women in tank crews with religious men. And so there's this pushback, and there's, so yeah, it's a big issue there about that, and dealing with it. Um, but yeah, look, men need to have a place. Where that's the beauty of it, is that the men in Judaism, the man has the synagogue and the woman has the home. Because I think, if otherwise, where's the man's place? You don't want his place to be in the pub, right? He's got to have a place that's his, that's for men. So
Rabbi, can I bombard you with a question?
Sure.
While we're on the topic of women, I heard someone comment. I'm not sure if it was a rabbi or who, but I was almost, I was smiling when I heard the comment, and he was saying something along the lines of, I don't know if it's true or if it's part of Kabbalah teaching, but someone said that along the lines of Hashem bends the ear if a woman is praying, and especially if she's crying, or something along those lines, as if Hashem, not to say that it's in a bad way or Hashem shows favoritism or something, but it's almost like there's a special, it means something more to Hashem when a woman prays, or so it's almost like, well, us men better be careful how we treat our women, and there's nothing wrong with that, because some men need a lesson, I think, in how to treat their woman.
Yeah, I think that comes from a reliable source in our sages, that if a woman is insulted or hurt, her feelings are hurt, that it's taken very seriously, that Hashem sees those tears, and that a husband and, men have to be very careful in their treatment of women. Again, in today's society, like, if somebody hears you say that, they could freak out. How dare you, say that women are more sensitive. Woman can, I'm a big woman. I'll punch you in the face. I'm a kickboxing woman. What do you mean I'm sensitive? I'm not sensitive. I'm Rambo, whatever. So, but that's not the Jewish traditional. That's not our position. That there's a recognition that women, again, are there exceptions? Sure, there may be exceptions, but there's also the fact that in our society today, women are being pressured to be more aggressive. They're being pressured to be more like men. So it's almost hard to tell sometimes, and how much of that is sometimes a facade, and then women are really their level of sensitivity that they're not admitting to, and that's not healthy. But men too. This is a very long discussion, and of course I've gone over my time limit, which is okay. But I think in the ancient world and in the Torah, I think we're just being honest about the distinctions between men and women that have been since the beginning of history, instead of trying to push things around because it doesn't fit the way we'd like it to be for some reason that I don't understand. To be honest with you, I don't understand what the big rush is that women should rush out into the work world, in corporate, and to be with people that don't care about them, that look at them as a means to making more wealth. I don't understand what the rush is, as opposed to being in an environment of love and giving love and nurturing and building the next generation. We're telling women that that's something to be ashamed of, and that the thing you should be doing with your life is to being with a bunch of strangers who couldn't give a hoot about you, and with a boss that would like to squeeze every bit of life out of you to make $1. That's what you should be doing. I don't understand it. It just seems it's really harmful. I think it's harmful to women. I do understand the fact that women need to be protected from abusive husbands, and that there has to be an equal playing field. And a lot of women say, you know, so they should be able to work. And the Torah doesn't forbid women from working. So, I mean, there's no halachic thing that women can't work. It's nothing to do with the issue, but women shouldn't be discouraged from motherhood. That's the issue. So, you know, there are issues in terms of Jewish law. This is just, I'm going to go from one thing to the other, and it's a big discussion. Maybe we should have a class on it in itself. But the point is, men and women need domains, and the men need to have something that they're in control of also, for heaven's sake. I mean, it's just, that's really valuable. You know what I mean? I mean, I see things completely different than the modern world does. The modern world is like, what does a woman have? All she has is her home and her children. What? That's what people live for, who are normal people. I don't understand. You know, it's like, no, she shouldn't, that's not important. What's important is, you know, money and fame, and these things are empty. We need money for the family. The man is bringing home, that's, you know, to bring home to the place where there's love, where there's nurturing, where there's identity, where there's foundation. So what is the rush to leave that place of love and identity, you know, and stability, and to go out and make a living any way you can and bring home? I don't understand what the rush is. To have a profession in case a husband ends out to be a louse and you have to break up the marriage is a different thing. But by the way, even that, the women having, you know, a way to make a living is also an issue too, because it makes it too easy to get divorced. What I mean is, even the man could say, well, you can make your own living, you know, and the courts don't have to worry about taking the money from the man because the woman can take care of herself. So it takes away a big deterrent of what needs to happen. Is the problem is the courts have to be really responsible to protect women's rights, number one. But again, I'm not saying a woman shouldn't be able to make a living. The Torah, there's nothing halakhically any place that a woman can't have a job of whatever kind. In fact, there's discussions in the Talmud about, you know, a woman working, and that money, though, does belong to her husband in halakhic terms. All the money in the house financially becomes part of the husband's household. So yeah, again, something very not PC to say, but again, what people fail to realize is we have to have a balance. And I honestly do believe that women were given so much that it's not what people seem to think, that women don't have anything intrinsically and men were given everything. I don't think that's the case. I think it's, I think that if we leave things, you know, if we, men just have to have some things too. You know, I don't think it's appreciated enough. Look, women though work really, really hard at home, taking care of a home. And I'm talking about in the traditional sense, whether it's the cleaning and taking care of the children. It's extremely difficult. It could often be difficult work. So that's something that I recognize. It's not a joke. And you know, a man is responsible to honor his wife and give her whatever help he can financially afford to give her. And Maimonides talks about it. He has to give her as many housekeeping help as he can afford if she needs it. So that's the other thing about that. But at the same time, to be in an environment of love, you know, with your children is a wonderful place to be. I don't know why everyone's running. I don't understand why everyone's running away from it. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, so that is that. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Rabbi.
You're very, very welcome. Again, a little caveat, a lot of these things are my own ideas based on my own, whatever comes from the books, sourced. Some of them, a lot of it is my own explanations, thoughts based in Torah, but not everything is necessarily, you know, but if it makes sense to you, makes sense, then go with it, right? Okay, have a very good night. Laila Tov.